as a woman entrepreneur from a developing country, can you please tell us what needs to be done to ensure that all women entrepreneurs join the e-commerce wagon?
It's a very big question. I think if you look at the world, we're working in very different environments. And even when you talk about developing countries, the difference between one developing country and another is immense. You have educational differences, you have geographical and infrastructural differences, connectivity differences. So I think I have to maybe look at where I'm located. I've been located in Kenya for the last 25 years. And so I better talk more specifically around that environment. And if I look at Kenya, there's several things that need to be done. Connectivity is not bad. Of course, we always complain because the more you use the net, the faster you want it to be. But if I look at it in comparison with many other African countries that I've traveled to, I think the connectivity isn't too bad. If I look at the diversity of the entrepreneurs, the female entrepreneurs that I work with and that I associate with, my peers and so on, again, there's a huge diversity. You're working with maybe women who in themselves are entrepreneurs, they're artisans, they're in rural areas, they have mobile phone network, but they may not be taking the data bundle to be able to access things online. Their children may be when they have disposable income, but they themselves may not be. And then you go from there right through to people who've been to the best universities in the world and who have come back and started their own businesses. So that diversity is immense. And I think there's some hurdles that are in common, and then there are obviously some hurdles that are distinct to that educational or geographical situation. When I look at the general problems, one might be, for me, a big one is logistics. I'm comparing it, I've been in London for the last month and I've been comparing how easy it is to do logistics from London. I want to send a package to Kenya, I put it in online immediately, I have a whole series of options, I can compare timeframes, prices and so on, and I can collect it or I can drop it or so on. There's endless opportunities on how I can get my package from A to B. When I'm in Nairobi doing that, and Nairobi is a connected cosmopolitan city, already it's not like that. I have to pick up the phone or email a whole series of service providers independently. Then I have to work out which is going to be better. I know that generally speaking in the past, the public hasn't trusted the postal services because too many things went missing. That has improved. But if I'm an entrepreneur wanting to send my goods out, I don't really want to risk the postal services unless I know there's some kind of insurance or guarantee. So if I'm selling online or selling, if I was going to do that locally, I'm using a motorbike. Now the motorbike, yes, we now have Send It, which is like an Uber for bikes, but before that it was just literally, I know this motorbike driver, he's reliable, I don't know that one, so I'm not using that. So it's very case by case fragmented. And here we are talking about how do we get people selling their products globally? How do we get African brands from just being located in a little place, one of 54 countries in Africa, how do we get that product global? So this logistics thing is a big one. It's a very big one because also how do you get effective pricing so that when you're shipping your goods, say from Kenya to the US, how do you do that at an affordable price? Now, if you're doing, say, a small item of jewellery, I know from Soko that they went straight to the Central Post Office, they put it in something, they post it, and that more or less has worked. But if your package is a bit bigger than that, it becomes extremely expensive. The courier companies are expensive for a small or a micro business. So it's not really an option. So investigating further, I realised that you actually have to make a certain bulk of stock, ship in bulk to some kind of point in the US or in Europe for then distribution. all of that requires time, effort, new knowledge, who's your partner on the other end, and it also requires inventory. So it's not like a small business sitting in London or Geneva or wherever where you can, have your product in different places and then also use that for your online sales. There, you really, if you're going to do export globally, you have to plan a bit more. Unless the product's something you can download from the net. But if it's actually a physical product, that's quite a big thing. So it's like, how do we get a kind of distribution point, maybe within our own country, like within Kenya, and then like export in a consolidated way so that freight is affordable? How do we build partnerships with these pick and pay points that they're at a price point that we can work with? That's across the board, regardless of whether you're a small entrepreneur in a very rural area or whether you're in the city. And for that rural entrepreneur, you also have that thing of how do you get from the rural area to the capital, so that's another issue. Everything at the end of the day, if you want to sell well, you have to photograph well. And that's something that I've realised has let us down often in the fashion business, because we can do superb fashion shoots, but the rate you need to change your product for e-commerce, or the fact that you're bringing out a little bit of this or a little bit of that or a little bit of that, because we also have this thing with a fabric supply, that if you're using African print, it's 6 yards of this, 6 yards of that, and when it's sold out, you can't get any more. So you may be quickly changing the actual fabric that you're making an outfit in. Now that to the consumer can be an advantage because it's a huge, it really is a limited edition. But as regards the requirement for photos for the customer to know what they're buying, that's very demanding. And it's about who do you know with a camera, and is there a model? I haven't seen the transparent dummies yet there, the lighting there. How do you do it in a way that it looks so slick that by the time it goes on the global platforms that the internet is, someone is going to have first of all, understand your product, but also value it according to the same values. Because people, when the product is not well photographed, you may not take a second look. But if it looks a bit interesting, you might. But then subconsciously, the mere fact that it's not photographed well is going to already undervalue what you've put out there. And that becomes a really big issue, because if we relate it to women, we know that women are bad at negotiating in general, although we have to change that, and they often underprice. Then we couple that with the fact that the product is coming from Africa, and psychologically all around the world there's this kind of subconscious, it's coming from Africa, it has to be cheap. No, good things should be paid for wherever they come from, and life in Africa is not necessarily cheap. It can actually be quite expensive. But this kind of, the thing of a photo that's not well done translates into, is it really going to arrive on time? Is it really going to look good? Is it just shoddy? And they've just kind of done something to make it look better. All of those messages just somehow come from that thing that's not photographed well. So if we want developing countries to be able to compete fairly, and some of us passionately believe in that, there has to be also investment in what is the product looking like online. How have we invested in that initial photo? And that requires skills, it requires equipment, and it requires money. I do think that maybe working in partnership with platforms like Jumia that are already quite well established across Africa can maybe take that agenda forward more. Because we do need centres almost where we can go and just get things done. So to get the logistics done, to get the photos done. When it comes to the uploading, if you have a good website, it's not that difficult. But my experience as an entrepreneur, I've tested doing websites in Kenya, like making my own, and there's a lot of brilliant tech people out there. I don't know why I've never managed to reach conclusion. I think it's because I'm a busy entrepreneur. And maybe I don't 100% know what I want, and then I change my mind and this and that. So going to a Squarespace or a Shopify in some ways is a lot easier. But then they don't have M-Pesa. And M-Pesa, which is the mobile money transfer, it's really widely used in Kenya and many of the other neighbouring countries. It's part of our entrepreneur daily life. We just transact everything on M-Pesa. So if we're now looking at local sales, if it doesn't have M-Pesa, we have a problem. For international sales, the credit card thing, of course, that works. But for local shopping, they may not have the credit card in the first place. So there's that whole thing of how do we get around that. PayPal also needs to do better agreements with banks in Kenya, no doubt in the rest of Africa, because we get paid through PayPal, but then we can't get our money. Or it takes like weeks to get our money. Maybe I'm exaggerating, but it's just a lot of extra effort. So all of these things that make your daily life slightly more difficult or a lot more difficult, someone easily gives up. You have unstable net sometimes, so maybe you're signing up on a great platform like SheTrades, and then the net drops and you've lost something. I mean, these are all things that I'm sure are being worked on all the time and will be improved. But it's very difficult, I think, sitting in a place like Geneva to remember just how many little things can go wrong. So your starting point is so much more connected that probably there's little things that just get overlooked. And I think the conversation, having people that are like literally have got off a plane from Africa, South America, Asia, whatever, all these different continents, different contexts, those people bring real life experiences of what's happening right now, and that's what helps improve the apps that are being designed for global rollout. Going on to apps, we discussed a lot today in the gender gap also about illiterate communities, illiterate women. And what I've learned making products with illiterate women is that even looking at a drawing, looking at a symbol can be complicated. Like a lot of these women have never picked up a pen before. And I recently did a training and I was using the computer to show the designs of what I wanted them to do. I was using a trends forecasting magazine to show them what I wanted them to do, because I feel that even when I'm doing training at a grassroots level, it's important that I introduce them to modern technology. I mean, they hear about computers, so why can't they look at the computers? Now, it's definitely difficult for someone who's illiterate to initially look at those images, but it's only by looking that they're going to get familiar with them. And we discussed today about the possibility of apps that are pictorial, but then just how localized those pictures have to be. And yet when I had Maasai women drawing on this course for the very first time, some of them were able to kind of draw a very basic version, almost like a plan of their homestead, like where the cow pen was, where the accommodation was, and so on. Others were drawing people, but more of a kind of a stick-like thing. But that was interesting to me because, as I say, it was just because they'd never tried. Now, what happens when someone's never tried, the first time it's like this, and then gradually you teach them, they get better and better and better. So these things of designing apps that are suitable for the situation, designing apps that are, well, with the involvement of women or designed by women, so that they're actually appropriate for the use by women entrepreneurs. Those things are very important, and we heard today that only 6% of apps are actually designed by women. That's a frightening statistic to me. Apps make life a lot easier when you learn how to use them. But one can imagine that, as a woman who's been quite vocal and just realized how different women and men think sometimes, and looked at the underrepresentation of women in policy making, in parliaments and things, you find men often making decisions on behalf of women. I mean, they don't spend every day doing what the woman does, and consequently it's understandable that they'll overlook certain things, or they'll see things from a different point of view, and they'll express themselves on something that a woman is in every day, and the woman will butt in and say, well, actually, it's not like that. But so we can imagine in the app world, it's the same thing. They design a magnificent app, but you give it to a woman and it just doesn't connect. So I see huge opportunity for getting girls into tech training and encouraging them to design apps. In Kenya, we're very lucky to have some real tech, global leading lights in tech, like Juliana Rotich or Oreo Kolo. There's quite a few, actually. And they've done groundbreaking tech work, which has had impacts globally. We need more of those people. We need them being trained. We heard today there's some programs around the world for 5 to 8-year-old girls. Perfect. Can we give the 5 to 8-year-old girls like the training they need to come up with things? They'll come up with the solutions that I'm struggling to think of. I saw something about wearable tech and how now the whole thing of how the body energy is being converted into something that can charge the phone through the textile you're wearing. And there was a sociologist who'd gone into primary schools, I think around Paris, and listening to that same age group, they maybe were 6 to 8 or 6 to 10, come up with just imagination of solutions that they would like to see for the future. That happened very recently in Maasai community near Amboseli. There's the same project I've been working on. And they had a huge community conference, and it was at the school, and it included the school kids. Now, when you see what those kids came up with and what their set of priorities were for development in that community, number one was the school bus. And that was because they wanted to go into other worlds and see what other people were doing and learn from it. Whereas the adults hadn't even thought about that. Then very high on the kids list was tech. This is a community their parents are illiterate, they're far from a city, but they've already heard about tech. They've heard about Facebook. Probably their older siblings are on Facebook. And they want to learn now. And I think time passes very quickly. And 5 years, a child who's now like 12, by the time they're 17, they can be setting up their own business. They've maybe set it up beforehand. So I think, again, this thing of how do we connect developing countries into the global marketplace through e-tech, we have to be looking at the kids that are at school. We have to be looking at primary, we have to be looking at secondary, we have to be looking at kids that have fallen out of the education system. We need to get through to them. Yeah. We also need better resources in terms of even simple things like handsets. Surely there must be collaborations that are possible between organizations like UNCTAD and mobile phone providers. Women need better phones, and they need phones that are associated with their businesses so that the kid can't play on the phone because this is something that they've been given for their business. Maybe it has business-specific apps on it. It doesn't have games for the kids. The kids need their phones as well, but the women need to have better phones to be able to conduct their business on there. Forget computers. I mean, okay, I love computers, but if I'm looking at the bulk of female entrepreneurs in Kenya, they're going to do it on the phone. That's how they're going to load their products. It's going to be how they check their costings. In fact, the apps need to include how do you price your product, what the market rate is right now for something. If their product is now something unique, is there a special area that unique, handcrafted, amazing products go into versus something that's more like a commodity, like the price of a cow or milk or what the grain costs. Apps which relate to the kind of businesses that women are in, second-hand clothing, trading in that, how can they get that to their consumer quicker? I think those are the ways that e-commerce is going to take off, because we inevitably find solutions to our own environments. But if we're accessing a global marketplace, we have to be prepared and organize ourselves in a way that those global marketplaces will look at our products.
Thank you. As you have seen during this week, UNCTAD has managed to bring together key stakeholders from government, private sector, all the policymakers who are around. What would be your message, and what do you want to see at the end of the week as the result, successful result?
I would like to see a lot of the world's ills solved through technology and e-commerce. I'm very passionate about African brands reaching global marketplaces. I think there's a huge trade imbalance between Africa and the rest of the world. I would like to see finished products, brands from Africa, getting into a global marketplace at a good price, not at a cheap price, like properly paid for, like a good quality product. I would also like to see women having equal access. And when we say equal access, whether it's African brands or women, in both cases, you probably have to go overboard to try and push them to be able to even come close to equal, because the inequality right now is so big. So there really needs to be huge effort made in that. And I know there'll be many men that are also interested in developing that. But we can't just perpetuate the world's imbalances through technology, and that seems to be a bit what's beginning to happen. We have to be like a bit brighter than that, a bit wiser than that, and look at addressing the issues and overcoming them, and like being a leapfrog from where we're at now into a fairer world. That, for me, at the end, is the most important thing.
That's good. Thank you very much.